Okay, today we're talking about reactive state management from the point of view of React. And we're going to see how we can leverage observables to build reactive state managements that are truly reactive. I'm going to start off this presentation, this talk, with maybe a hot take. What if I told you that React is not reactive? And that's not only me, that's the opinion of the community as well. But before we jump into the conclusions, let's be clear about the terms, about the terminology. So if we are referring to reactivity, we must know what is that term, right? And Heinrich Apfelmus once says, the essence of functional reactive programming is to specify the dynamic behavior of the value completely at the value of declaration. I don't know about you, but this seems a little bit complex to me. This is like a formal definition. In simpler terms, reactivity refers to how an application automatically updates the UI whenever we change some state, right? But you may ask, isn't React doing exactly this? You define a state, you set the state to new value, and UI is declaratively updating itself, right? And especially if we are looking into the benefits of reactiveness, we would say React has automatic updates, it has improved developer experience, and has enhanced user experience, and it has reduced the code complexity, right? But if we look further under the hood, we might notice that there is a scale of reactivity, how reactive you can be, and there is a coerced and fine-grained reactivity. On one side of the spectrum, we have a React, which has a simpler approach, and whenever the state changes, the whole UI re-renders, and the old children of a component that has changed state will re-render. On the other side of the spectrum, we have solid.js with more granular control over UI updates. Solid.js will update only the parts of the DOM that have really changed without need to re-render everything. And that's where signals are on the stage. So signals are everywhere, and you probably know how they took our community as a storm. And everybody has now signals. Angular, Vue, Svelte recently, Quick, even Preact. Even there is a one-stage proposal for signals to be included as part of the vanilla JavaScript. And that is what are we going to talk about today. We're going to see, because React doesn't have signals, and it's not on the roadmap of React, we're going to see what are the options and how we can move the needle towards fine-grained reactivity. I'm going to quickly introduce myself. When I was in high school, I always wanted to study psychology. Now I work my dream job as a development lead at Vega IT, where I'm like a soft skills teacher for engineers. The topics that I teach people that I lead are effective communication for engineers, stress management, time management, how to set your goals and achieve your goals, and stuff like that. And also, I'm a technical architect. Besides that, I'm doing this pretty much regularly, so you can catch me up on many conferences. And this is the QR code if you want to scan it right now, so maybe you want to follow the presentations with me along. I will give you a sec to do so. Okay, we're good to go. We talked a bit about reactivity, but now let's talk about state management. If we were about to build a perfect state management, what characteristic that state management would have? It would have to be scalable. It would have to be predictable. Performance is a must. It has to be maintainable and scale well. And developer experience has to be also very good. We talked about solid.js and how signals popularized this idea. And if we were about to scale and rate these characteristics with solid.js, we would see that solid is good off the charts, especially with performance. I put like an OK could be better, right, for the clean dev experience, because as we know with solid.js, we might fall off the cliff of reactivity without any warning. So we have to be really careful when reading documentation. I'm not going to go through the example of solid.js. I'm sure you have many other talks and maybe developer advocates from Solid that you can see the examples. But this is how, when I was observing these examples, how I rated solid.js. But what we can do in the meantime for React, RxJS has entered the chat. So RxJS is a library that enables reactive programming in JavaScript. And it's framework agnostic and library agnostic, so we can use it with React. This means that we can work with data streams, data flows, events in a more streamlined and declarative manner. And at the core of the RxJS is a data structure called observable. Like, observable is a stream of values that comes over time, and we can react to that change. Luckily for us, there is a React RxJS library, which is like a React bindings for RxJS. And they say that it is truly reactive, of course, because it uses RxJS. We can seamlessly integrate with React, and it is highly performant because we have this propagation system based on forward referencing subscriptions. So if we go to the documentation of it and we get started with it, we can see that the minimum example would be that we might have some input. We want to display the changes on that input, right? And we have create signal. So that's interesting. That's like similar to solid.js, at least from a developer experience perspective. And we can see here that the signal is an entry point to React RxJS. So it's like an equivalent of using subject or behavior subject. So it might seem the same as a signal in Solid, but under the hood is working a little bit differently. And we have a bind method to bind that observable value to the view. And all that it is left is to call a hook, use text in the component, and we will react and display the changes to the UI. And let's see how this performs in practice. So we have an example like this. With the current count, we have a button that will increase that count. And these two counters should be like observing, subscribing to the same value. Right here, we can see the random list of numbers. And we'll get to that, why is that important. But let's see the structure of the components in this example. So we have one root component, and this state is in the root component, this count. We have a title, which is like a textual component. There are no states, there are no changes there. And we have basic counter and a wrapper component, and inside of that wrapper, we have nested counter. So let's see what happens when we click the count button. We can see that all reactive values are reacting actually to the change of the count. But we might observe down here that the list of the random numbers is changing each time. If we use this React Dev Tools and we click on a button, we might see that each time we click a button, the whole render tree of components re-renders again. And we can inspect that in the console. So I've just put the console log for each component. So whenever I click, we have a re-render. So that's not performance-wise, not so good, but we have some kind of reactiveness, right, to it. In the code, we have a root component. And inside of that root component, we have that structure of components that I mentioned. And for the reactive values, we have a signal file. And this is like that entry point that we talked about. So we have a counter change, which is observable, and we can expose a setter that will change that value, right? And we bind that to the view. What's a good thing about this is that we can leverage the power of RxJS operators, so we can transform this state declaratively as we go. So we might do something like this. So we might take this state, this observable, pipe through it and take while the value is less than 10. So what happens if we bind this to the view and now try clicking the button? It will go up to the 9 and then we'll stop. So that's the one benefit of using RxJS. We have our share replay operator. So we create a unicast for all subscribers. So all subscribe to the very same state. Now we expose those hooks and now we can use them whenever we want in any components. So here is the root component. Here is the basic counter component. Here is the nested component. So all of them subscribe to the same state. Okay, let's rate this. We have targeted re-renders. So only DOM nodes that are subscribed to the changes will get re-render. But the downside is that all children will re-render as well because of the React rendering system. We can say that we have pretty much consistent state. We can know what to expect from each change. Performance library says that it's good. It's definitely upgrading from the default of the React, but we have those child re-renders as well. It's easy to reason about it. So it's pretty much this almost the same like solid.js signals, and the dev experience is okay. Why I rated this as okay? I rated React RxJS and not RxJS in general because there are not many debugging tools for RxJS for React, especially with the latest changes with Vite as a build system. So there were some tools that were working before, but as of today, we have some challenges there. Okay, that's one thing that we can do. And from the React RxJS docs, we can say that React is a pull-based system. On the other hand, RxJS is a push-based approach, and we declaratively define streams and their relationships. And with React RxJS, we bridge that gap between those two behaviors. But as you noticed before, we had some downsides and some challenges still with RxJS approach. And probably the most of you and some very smart people in the community like Ryan Carniato or Mishko Havery, they would say that RxJS is not so good for templating and for client state management, but it is definitely great, and it would really excel with async state management because observable is like a value that comes over time. But for the client state management, since that is the argument that we are having today with comparing to the signals, we can do better. And there is a absolutely legendary state management library called Legend State Observable, which brings fine-grained reactivity to React with minimum boilerplate, and it is designed for maximum performance and scalability. And they even say on their benchmarks that they are fastest reactive state management in React. If we go to their documentation, we can see that they define reactive primitive as observable. Now, before we had create signal, which is under the hood RxJS observable. Now we have observable, which is like pretty much more like a signal in solid.js, but they called it observable probably for historical reasons from Knockout.js. So we define observable value, we have observable, and then we can subscribe to it, track for the changes, and access to that value pretty much almost the same like we would access the value of solid.js signal. And like we said, it's the fastest one based on benchmarks, and it uses fine-grained reactivity for minimal re-renders. So we can see that even if we are updating the state, there are only changes that are updating will reflect in the DOM without re-renders. And they have powerful synchronizations and persistence. So how Legend State is doing this is leveraging also proxy objects under the hood like solid.js with signals. And also they are not hacking into I think they have that in the documentation. So why should we use legend state? Because they are not hacking React internals. They are doing everything with following React rules. They are just doing it in the smart way. Okay, so let's check how legend state performs. The same example as before, but now here I just put this state. This is a set state in React, just to show and compare with the legend state. And this count will update this state and this state. So these two are connected, and these two are observables from legend state. So if we click those, we can see the counter is updating, but we might observe one interesting thing, that this random list is not re-rendering again. It's not producing new values. So as much as we click this, nothing happens down here, but we have those two reactive values. If we check to the console, we might notice that those two components re-rendered only once, so which is the goal. And also we are still looking with the re-renders with React Dev tools, but we might observe that nothing is happening. But if we click this button, then we are observing re-renders again, because this is setting state in React. And how we would rate this? It has surgical precision. The state is consistent. Performance is off charts, but maybe not as performant as solid.js with signals because of the VDOM. It is definitely easy to reason about this. So the code is almost identical as a solid.js with signals. And I put that the dev experience is a little bit better, because here you cannot fall off the reactivity cliff here. You will get the warnings, you will get the errors. So it's not like failing silently in the background. And to conclude, probably the main question is, how much did we move the needle? So how much did we manage to get close to the solid.js reactivity with React? And I will leave that question to you, and maybe the question for the comment section, so maybe we can discuss this. I think it's really fun to discuss this topic, and it would be really, really nice to get another perspective, because I have my own personal opinion on this, but I would love to hear yours as well. And that would be all for today. Thank you so much for coming today. Here you can scan the QR code for the slides, and here you have the examples that I've showed you today on my GitHub, so you can go and check them yourself, see the behavior of one approach, the other approach, and so on. So yeah, that would be all.
Yay. Thank you. And we do have a few questions, and I'm very glad that the screen share ended up working, because when people asked me to go through RxJS, I was like, that's nope, not going to happen. So I am glad it ended up working. We do have a few questions of RxJS has a vast number of operators. Which operators do you find the most useful for state management, and why?
Okay, cool. That's a very cool question. Okay, definitely share replay, because it will do the unicasting. So all subscribers will subscribe to the one share state with latest from. So maybe you can combine two states. For example, in Redux architectures, you have an action, you dispatch an action, you say with latest from the previous state, and then you combine the payload and the new state, and or call a reducer in between. So definitely that. Of course, map filter are like a given, like in pure JS, vanilla JS, right? And I would say the most valuable one for me is tap, because of the debugging. Probably the biggest challenge that people have with RxJS is learning curve and debugging, and especially debugging. In my experience, especially debugging, and I use tap a lot, to debug the streams in between. Although I use a lot of tools, of course, to display values of the stream.
Thank you. All right. How can developers ensure their RxJS code remains maintainable and easy to understand as the application grows?
Wow, this is also a really cool question, and I thought about it a lot. So there are linters for RxJS, so you can include them as your linting rules and even pipelines. So maybe the linting fails if you mess something up with RxJS. So that's one thing definitely. Easy to understand would be to use those marble diagrams. So the documentation is amazing, and you have each operator explained in the visual way. And there are also a lot of online tools that you can play around. So you can create a stream of data, and then you can apply certain operators, and you can see how the stream is changing real time. And then you try that a little bit, tweak it a little bit, and then use it in your own application. And I believe there are some tools, browser extensions. How was it called? It was RxJS Insights, I believe. I've used that one.
Very cool. And what about unit test? Can you, how can you unit test E2E test RJS in RxJS? Wow, see if I can talk in React.
It's a bit tricky. It's a bit tricky to say it. Okay, so for the unit test, there is RxJS Spy library. So you can easily mock the stream of data inside of your unit test. And for the end-to-end tests, I believe that you just run the application like normally with Playwright or whatever you're using, and it will open the browser and start clicking and testing the functionality. So it's like a real-time functionality being tested end-to-end. So maybe I'm missing something. Please correct me, somebody, if I'm wrong, but I believe that's pretty much straightforward. But for the unit test, it's a bit trickier.
Thank you. All right, couple more questions of how does the new React version simplify the entire UI updating of React apps via use of React's new compiler?
I was expecting this question. I was prepared for this. Yes. So React compiler is basically just at build time rewriting our code to be more optimized. So you just put you don't have to write your hooks. So you don't have to memoize by manually and use memo, use callback. React compiler will do that out of the box. But for example, with this approaches that we covered today, so with legend state, it's like much more like Signal. So it's not rewriting the code. It's doing like fine-grained reactivity out of the box.
Very cool. And up next, is there an integrated end-to-end testing like React?
I'm not sure I understand this question. Is there?
Different than the unit testing? I'm not sure if there would be a different way of doing that, but I'll go to the other question that we have of do we not complicate ourselves if we add more libraries such as RxJS, for instance?
That's a fair question. That's a very fair question. Maybe it might seem like that at first, but in React, we have so many state managements that I think we're getting used to it. One benefit of using RxJS would be to have a streamlined experience with state management, both for client and server state. So you can use the same library, same state management to handle both. Mostly in React today, we have a separate library for client state management and separate library for async state management. So we have to learn two libraries and to combine those. with this, we can use the same library to do both. So I think that's the benefit, the main benefit of that. Either way, you will have to include some kind of state management for React, because React is not so very well at that by default.
All right. And how does the performance of an application using RxJS for state management compare to using one using Redux or Context API?
That's a great question. I'm afraid that I'm not sure how to answer it, because I will have to benchmark it and check it, comparing toe to toe. But out of my head, I think that with context, it would definitely be RxJS would be definitely faster, because with context we will re-render the whole subtree of components, right? With RxJS, we can target the DOM nodes that are only interested in those subscriptions that we have. So that's really beneficial. And for the Redux, I believe the Redux has a context as well, but to pass the instance of the store and not the values. So by changing the values, it won't re-render the whole context subtree. It will re-render only the interested subscribers, especially with the Redux toolkit. I think they're having some smart optimizations under the hood, with selectors, with caching and stuff like that. So it's like a more atomic state. So I believe it would be much closer with RxJS and Redux, but with RxJS and context, I believe RxJS would be faster.
Thank you. Can someone use RxJS together with Vue.js, and does it make sense to?
Yes, definitely. There is also a binding for Vue.js. I would say yes in certain situations. So Vue.js is really good with reactive client state management with refs. So it's like Vue already has a reactive primitive like signals. So refs in Vue are like signals in Solid.js, right? So that part is covered, and I think that we don't have to include RxJS for that. But then again, for async state management and reacting to the side effects and communicating with the network, I think it would be really beneficial.
Great. And how do you see the evolution of front-end technologies, such as frameworks and libraries, in the next 5 years?
A little bit futuristic view, right? I believe that this trend with signals will definitely continue, especially now when we have the stage 1 proposal for signals to be included in JavaScript, in the core JavaScript. I don't know if that will happen in the next 5 years, but I believe that this trend will go to every framework and library. Everybody will take this kind of approach with signals. And this is regarding this topic. And in general, I see that there will be more frameworks that are more focused on developer experience rather than performance. Now we have Nuxt or in Vue, or Next, Remix in React, Quick. So all of these frameworks that are initially started with performance optimizations, but more of them are investing into developer experience. They are trying to make us faster and make us build features more quickly. So that I think that whoever takes the developer experience next will take over as a go-to framework.
Thank you. And last but not least, what resources, such as book courses or documentation, would you recommend for developers new to RxJS and reactive programming?
Okay, cool. There are a lot of great courses on Udemy or Frontend Masters with this topic, and one of the most beneficial resources for me was to go to RxJS recipes website, and they are like real-time use cases for each operator explained. You can go through the stream and define it, through definitions and real use cases for each operator. So, and you have like cool examples like mini games or like cool UI components, animation systems and stuff like that. So it was really beneficial for me when I was learning RxJS.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today. That is all of our questions. And everyone, you saw the link earlier, so make sure to go follow Nikola and on social media and stay up to date. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.